there's such overlap between the personal life and the the business life. And they just, they just kind of blend together because, I mean, for example, at night, I mean, how many people find it no big deal to sit in bed with their partner and with their iPad?
Right. Today's guest is a respected psychoanalyst, clinical and relationship expert. She has a unique approach to helping people navigate their way through relationships, whether they're trying to save or improve a relationship or going through the trauma of divorce. She integrates both interpersonal dynamics with interpersonal skills for individuals going through such separation and divorces. And she also specialises in helping committed careerists and business people to negotiate boundaries for their work and their personal relationships. I think I need you. Entrepreneurs and business people are really struggling today under the pressure of juggling a business and their personal life. And it's her expertise in this area that makes her so relevant in today's fast-paced economy. She has developed a cutting-edge relationship model she calls yours, mine, ours, romantic partnership done right. Her innovative approach assists clients in simultaneously developing their individual identities while teaching them how to successfully integrate that unique identity into their partnerships. As well as running her own private practice, she's been a consultant to Nobel Peace Prize recipients, Physicians for Human Rights, a TV guest expert. She's also the author of the book Who Am I Without My Partner? Please welcome, it's my greatest pleasure to bring to you the entrepreneur's shrink herself, Dr. Deborah Hecker, PhD. Hi, Deb. How are you?
Hi, Georgette. Wow, that was a lovely introduction. I'm thinking to myself, really? Did I do all of that stuff?
My dear, I cut some of it out. Otherwise, I'd have been going on for a while, believe me.
Okay.
I thought I had to bring some of this down. So yes, you did do all of that and more.
Hey, thank you for that lovely introduction.
No,
Much
you're very
appreciated.
welcome. But before we go any deeper, I mean, I can't wait to get into the meat of things, but just to find out a little bit more about you, how did Deborah get into the sphere of work that you're in now? What was your journey? Did you have a job and you decided to transition into becoming or having your own practice? What was your business journey, shall we say?
My business journey was actually a personal journey. Since we're being very direct here, I will tell you exactly, Georgette, how I got into the business of emotional development. Shortly after I was married many years ago, I lived in New York City, and as happens to many newlyweds, I felt a degree of anxiety, and I found myself, and this was in the early 70s in New York City, when it wasn't terribly trendy to go into psychotherapy or psychoanalysis the way it is today. Everybody has a shrink today. And so what I did is I managed to find someone, and I was one of those early people who went a couple of days a week, and I would lay on the couch and I started to learn a lot about myself. And I can remember one day I thought to myself, wow, I bet I'd be good at this. And that was the beginning of my journey. And what I did at that point, I was young. I was in my early 20s, and I had graduated from college. And those were the days when women were either going to follow their mother's leads, which in most cases would mean that you became a housewife and had children, or you were going to jump on board with the women's movement and develop a career. And I happened to identify more with the latter. And I went to Columbia University and I started my journey. It was a very organic experience for me. Let's put it that way. You know how sometimes you hear about people who they're born knowing what they want to do. Well, I wasn't quite that, but I knew this is what I'm going to do.
Quite early on.
Yeah, at a young age, right? And again, as I said, Georgette, what was interesting was at that point, I was a newlywed, and I really wasn't sure who I was. You know, the culture was changing tremendously, and I got into the business of emotions.
I love it. So you're a newlywed. And so let's just say you're a young newlywed. And this comes up all the time with people who are going into coaching generally. Have I been around long enough to be able to do this? Do I know enough? Will people take me seriously? What's my credibility? Now, I know you are now a Dr. Deborah Hecker, but did you have any issues around whether you'd be taken seriously or whether you had enough credentials to do it?
That's a great question. The answer is a resounding yes. And I began, after I got my initial master's degree, I then decided I need to go on for further training. And what I did at that point, I applied and was accepted to a psychoanalytic institute in New York City, which means basically I was studying psychoanalytic theory. And at a certain point in our training, we would have to start seeing clients. And I can actually remember I was sitting on a bus going to my office and to see my first appointment. And if this doesn't answer your question, nothing does. I got her name wrong. I was so nervous that I called her Jane instead of Ellen or something like that. At any rate, I think the real point is that probably true in any profession. When you're a newbie, you don't know what you're doing. And you have to be willing to accept that and just sort of push forward. So the answer is absolutely. It's about 35 years later, and I am definitely not the person I was when I first started. I felt very insecure, I guess would be the word.
You now, I suppose there's three parts. There's the relationship aspect where you're trying to hold something together. Then there's the divorce when it's decided you can't hold it together anymore. But the bit that I really wanted to talk to you about, I mean, I know they're all interlinked, obviously, was this, and you could probably tell me better how new this is, because we've come through now into the age of the technology, bringing about a lot more entrepreneurs than there ever was before. And the barrier to entry to being an entrepreneur is so much lower. But instead of it being the wonderful life that we all dream about working for ourselves, it's become a major source of overwhelm, stress, time suck. Is it as new as we think it is, or has this always been an issue with people who run businesses? And what I'm trying to say is, how many people do you see where this has been such a big thing, or is it a new thing?
I think that the technological age has really redefined the life and lifestyle of the entrepreneur or the business founder. Today, with iPads and iPhones, and it's 24/7. There's the relationship between one's partner, significant other, and the business there. There was a time when it was very separate. I can say I know when I was young, my dad was a corporate attorney, not an entrepreneur, but he was a pretty high powered person. When he walked through that door at 6 o'clock at night, that was it. That was it. And the weekends would come and he was off to the golf course. He may have brought his briefcase home because he was going to court the next day, but he didn't open it up.
Yeah.
And today, Georgette, in response to your question, it's very, very different. There's such overlap between the personal life and the the business life. And they just, they just kind of blend together because, for example, at night, how many people find it no big deal to sit in bed with their partner and with their iPad?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's very easy. What typically happens, I think, is that the relationship can be relegated to second place.
Yeah.
And so it is very different today. The world used to be 9 to 5. After 5 o'clock, that was it. Not the case anymore.
And there's also, not in not in all cases, but there's also sort of a section of the entrepreneurial world where it is, you're revered if you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you talk 9 to 5, what the hell is wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Why you're not on it? You're not doing enough. You're not doing enough. You're not doing enough. If you're not available, basically 24 hours a day almost, okay, you might be allowed some sleep, then the pressure that you're not competing is immense now. How much do you think that really does impact the individual? Are we listening to that, or is it just simply technology and just a way of life?
That's another excellent question. I think that there is an emphasis that the more you work, the harder you work, the less you play, the better it is. And the fact that our lives are so embedded with technology, it perpetuates that notion. And I actually have a forthcoming book out, which some of your listeners may be interested in, and the title speaks to this. The title of it is Torn Between Two Loves: How Entrepreneurs Can Successfully Commit to Both Business and Significant Other. And the reason I wrote this is because I think that it is a major problem that relationships have lost their value. And I don't know that the divorce rate for entrepreneurs is any different than it is for the population at large, but the divorce rate is pretty high. At least where I'm talking from in America, it's hovering over 50%. And so I think that entrepreneurs have lost their way in terms of their value systems. Somebody is not building a business to lose their love. Yeah. And that is very easy for entrepreneurs to get into that bind.
But do you find sometimes maybe it's also quite conscious, where there is a decision, I need to work or I need to spend time with my significant other? Actually, I think I'll work. Or are we all just victims of the time suck?
No, I think we can become victims if we're not mindful. But I think, that's part of what my book is about, is that in order to have a successful business, one's biggest supporter, the research shows, Georgia, that one's biggest supporter is their significant other. And they need to work as a team. They don't need to be adversaries. Mm-hmm. They need to work as a team. And therefore their relationship is central to their lives together. And so I think one has to mindfully choose not to be a victim of that and to work on their relationship so that they're partnering. If you think about it, I'm a believer that one has to build their personal relationship the way they build their business. They have to have a purpose. They have to have clearly defined roles. They have to have goals. They have to, I mean, it's the same concept. And I think what can happen so easily to entrepreneurs is that they don't think in those terms. You know, the relationship is, oh, it'll always be there, whatever. And that is not the way entrepreneurs need to think.
Let's start with the technology. First of all, we laugh and we say the person that goes to bed with a laptop, and that was me. I confess.
Sure. Well, it's one thing. It's one thing if you're going to bed by yourself. It's another thing if you're going to bed with your partner.
Well, actually, I wasn't going to bed with it. I would be there already. It was when I was writing my book. I'd already be there. But then he would get in bed, and I wouldn't turn it off. I'm busy. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. So eventually I look around and I hear the snoring. And I think, oh, he's gone. I'll just carry on. And so that was it. But then that hasn't been for a very long time. I became quite conscious about that, even down to the telephone. But let's just, not even just in the bedroom necessarily, just the technology in itself. I mean, don't have to go into too many, maybe one or two boundaries is probably the word I'm looking for, that we can set or intentions of how we can minimize the intrusion of technology, whether it be the iPad, the laptop, the telephone, with our significant other. What couple of things could we do?
Sure. I'm thinking, for example, something that's very easy to do. You're out to dinner and the phone rings. And so I think that there can be a very clear-cut boundary that people have, that there's no telephone answering during dinner. We could take it even a step further, and this is what some people do. They decide that once they come home at night, they're not going to be dealing with business anymore. I think each couple has to really decide what's going to work for them. And it's a mutual decision. I have a great example. It's really the people. It's a husband and wife team who do my hair, and they have a very successful business. And I was telling them about this forthcoming book, and they have managed to create, to be business partners. They have two things that they said is very clear for them. They have very clearly defined roles and absolutely no talk about business at home. They will, Georgette, create a business meeting for the two of them, separate from any of their personal relating at home. And they said it works wonderfully for them. And I listen closely because I think, people have to work at that. As you said, you use the word victims. Entrepreneurs can become victims, or they can sit down and say, what are our boundaries? What are we going to do? And we can both decide this together, that is going to create a separateness between our personal lives and our business lives.
I mean, there are a couple that work together. Kudos to them, because I don't know many people who could do that. So that alone just says they're an exceptional couple anyway. But so they're, don't say them, but you're coming home from work. But we have so many people now who work from home. So the boundaries are even more blurred. How do you navigate that? We can do physical things like, I don't know, close the door. But when that laptop is in the same place as where you eat, you conduct your relationship with your children, your husband or your wife, what things could you practice to say? Because a lot of the business that we do is around the clock. We can get an email at any time, which we can respond to at any time. And sometimes it is urgent, sometimes it isn't. How do you determine when you stop, when you can just keep going?
I think you can. I think that, first of all, I think most entrepreneurs who are working at home are likely to have separate space, where they can, where the boundary is clearly defined. I think I think one has to decide. There are going to be times, of course, where something comes up and it's urgent, but I think those times can be differentiated from the hours that are designated to work. I don't think it has to be as difficult as you just made it sound. I think that is a choice. that people can make. I mean, I'm sure there are times where you can say to yourself, you know what, it's really important that I go and have my lunch now, and I'm just going to set this aside right now. I mean, I think we have more control over this. And I just love your word victim. We can be victims of this, or we can, we're in control of our lives. The entrepreneurial life does not have to be in control of us. Now, I'm not so naive to say that. I certainly understand that an entrepreneur's life can be extremely demanding. But as I said before, I'm a big believer that one isn't building their entrepreneurial life so that their personal life collapses.
Correct me if this is just me, just a perception. Over the last few years, I've spent lots more time with entrepreneurs, obviously through work and just from networking. And I found that my social circle and my work circle are almost becoming one and the same. That has made it a lot more difficult to also cut the boundaries off. Because like you say, you go to work and you have your work colleagues, and then you come home and then you might have your other friends who are completely from two completely separate worlds. Those worlds are now meshing. And also what happens is I've found, especially with us as women, in the UK, I found that not only are we socializing together, but to the exclusion of the men. So they almost like that entrepreneurial relationship. So there's not even just you're competing with the actual work, with the relationship, you're competing with the people related to their work. So even when you do come out of work, where do you spend it? With those other friends. So the relationship's gone now to third place. And I'm trying not to be too general about it, but it seems to be a lot of the women. And because we're in that sort of, a lot of them in that 50 plus space, it's the divorces and it's the women. And they're just, you know what, I don't think this is working for me. Like almost making the decision, I have chosen this over that. Maybe they just chose the wrong person in the first place, but I mean, how are you finding that in your private practice and the people you're coming across? Is that a trend that you see, or is it just my perception?
I think that the statistics might bear that out. Actually, it's not something that I have seen overwhelmingly in my practice. I think. We could look at it from a gender perspective. I also think that we could get into a whole discussion, Georgette, about how relationships, how important they are, how people take them for granted. I think technology is a wonderful thing. I think one of the areas that it has not really been helpful in has to do with interpersonal relationships. I talk to a lot of people who are on the dating sites, and dating has become a very different experience, I know, than when I was younger. People will go on these sites and there's a kind of immediate gratification aspect to it where if many people these days are certainly going online to these different dating sites, and it's like, oh, if something doesn't work out, okay, well, I'm going to go back online and see if I can find somebody better. I can remember, I'm in my 60s. I remember that, when you started dating someone, like you'd actually hang in there, you'd bring them home to meet your parents.
Hang in there.
And I think that to some extent, this business of, hooking up, and I just think the whole concept of interpersonal relationships and commitment and what is a relationship. I mean, I have people who talk about the fact that they're not even at the stage yet with their like online dating where they talk on the phone. It's still about texting.
Wow. It's amazing.
I know. And so again, whether or not there are more, I believe there may be something to what you said about more women. I think that overridingly, I now talk to my women friends in their 50s and 60s, and if they are unpartnered, either through divorce or through death or separation, they come into their own. I mean, if they are financially and economically self-supporting, they don't have those dependency needs. And I think that their perception of whether or not they need to be married or living with somebody really begins to change. So that gets off into a whole nother discussion.
I think you've just nailed what I was trying to say. That seems to be what I've come across. It's almost like a light goes on, a shift happens, and that little woman who was dependent on the man, God, I've been so sexist here, it does change. And she's like, well, hold on a minute. A friend of mine, I remember saying to her ex now, there was a time when I needed you to have children and we were building something together. I'm not going to have kids anymore. I don't need you to have a house and so on. And so it made her rethink. And then going out and starting her own business, that was just a nail in the coffin. And to some degree, it's almost as if the very thing that is liberating us as women is helping to kill something that, I agree with you, should be something we should be preserving. Dr. Phil said many years ago, I always remembered, he said, your relationship, you hang it on a tree so that it's untouchable. And just the vision of that has always stayed with me.
Well, this concept that you're talking about is a very smooth transition for us to talk about my partnership model, which I think is, I would apply it to really any relationship, but let's talk about a romantic partnership, and especially as it relates to entrepreneurs. In a nutshell, Georgette, the name of my model is yours, mine, and ours, romantic partnership done right. The concept is pretty simple. In theory, I don't think it's as simple to execute. In my view, there are three entities in every relationship. There are the two individuals, and then there's the world that they create between them. And all three of those entities have to be nourished and nurtured simultaneously. So basically what I'm saying is that each person has to build they're responsible for building their own identity. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't stop. That doesn't stop when you get married. In fact, ideally, one goes into a permanent formal relationship when they have a pretty good solid sense of themselves. And that typically is not necessarily the case. And of course, that's what keeps people like me in business, because what happens is, they start looking to their partner to fill in their own gaps. Mm. Okay. So let's just say with this model, each person is building their own identity that has no overlap to their partner. It's, picture a wall, around each individual, but then they let their walls down and they create this we, and they go back and forth between the we and the I, but that we is absolutely important to preserve. Mm. And I think that, as you say, I think we both acknowledge that we is, it's losing its importance to some extent. And I think also what happens, like the women that you talked about, they have unfortunately not been able to develop their individual identities to a sufficient degree in the context of their partnership. So then they become liberated. It's like, wow, I can really be myself now. Yeah. In my clinical work, I am let's put it this way. A relationship can only be as good as the people in it. So in my clinical work, I am very focused on building individual identity and interpersonal identity.
That's absolutely great to hear, because one of the issues, I call it issues, one of the big conversations that I used to always have with my partner was, you need a hobby outside of me. Not that he followed me around or anything like that at all. He's a very easy, content human being, but it drove me crazy, because then I felt obligated to be available all the time, if that makes any sense. So it
makes total sense.
It drove me nuts. So it became almost, it started off as a joke, and I found I was getting actually quite, when you say you harp on it, I was nagging, I suppose is the best way to put it. It's like, sure. So what are you up to this weekend then? You got any plans? Like, do something without me. Because, and he said, what is this big deal? I said, because I want to fancy you 20 years from now. And if you don't evolve, I will have nothing to fancy. And he looked at me and he just went, wow, I never thought of it like that. I said, I'm telling you, because you're just going to be boring to me. And he was like, wow. He said, and he was
You
like,
know,
and he's a great guy like that way. He hears those things and he takes it on board. But and it just came out, and I just said, you will bore me if you don't do
mhm.
something outside of
Well,
me.
let me go back and tell you how I really got into this. I was very happily married for 18 years. This goes back, years ago, and I had two lovely young daughters. And my husband was offered a job with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. At the time, we lived in Manhattan. And we moved down there. I had a practice in Manhattan. So what I did was I was kind of reverse commuting. I would go up to New York, like 2.5 days. Anyway, the upshot of this is that one day I was very blindsided. He came in and he said to me, there's somebody else. And I had just moved to Washington, D.C. for his business, and I was
No.
commuting. Yeah. And so, the reason I'm raising this is because, to all outward appearances, Georgette, I was this very independent woman. I had a practice in D.C. I had a practice in New York. I had two great kids. We had a live-in nanny. And to say I was devastated is an understatement.
Sure.
But more than that, I realized that I was way more emotionally dependent on him than I realized. And that began my personal journey of developing myself in ways that I was more underdeveloped than I recognized. So that's how I got into the whole world of divorce, helping people, because I realized that, I of course sought out professional help, but most people, very competent doctors, but most people didn't realize the degree to which married people's identities become enmeshed with one another. Mm. If they're not fully defined as individuals, this is what happens. And then, of course, what happens is when sadly there's a divorce, these people, their sense of themselves is underdeveloped. So this is why I developed this partnership model where I'm, in people's faces about, you are only as good as you are as an individual. And people come in and they think, oh, my marriage is a mess, and my partner's doing this and that. And I'm very big on personal responsibility. What are you doing here? What do we need to look at that is your contribution, which doesn't negate that their partner is contributing. But it's I'm very, very respectful of the need to be emotionally self-reliant. That doesn't mean that we don't need attachments and people that we love and want to be with. But it does mean that we have a primary responsibility to take care of ourselves.
And what are a few practical ways the way we can start? So we're in a relationship and the boundaries are just blurry. We're the couple are probably not connecting as they should. They're probably too far apart. So what you're saying about being your own self, but to the point where the relationship is suffering. So what are a couple of things, just starting off, just looking at us as individuals, that we can do to maybe make sure that we have a sense of our own identity, even though we are part of a couple?
Well, my immediate reaction is back to the word victim that you used earlier. People can easily feel like they're victims of what their partner is doing to them. So I think the first thing that people can do is make a conscious effort to start introspecting, taking a look at oneself, like what am I doing here? What do I need to look at about myself? How am I the partner I want to be? There's a question, right? Mm-hmm. It's so easy to say, it's so easy to think in terms of what is my partner doing for me or not doing for me? Yeah. How about looking at, am I the partner I want to be? Mm. How if somebody said to my partner, what kind of a partner is Debbie, or what kind of if I asked your partner, tell me about Georgette as a partner, it would be very interesting to hear what they would say, and we need to be, to thine own self be true. So I think there's a lot one could do. Now, of course, the reality is it's pretty hard to be objective about oneself. It's very easy to have our blinders on. And therefore, then it gets into, if people can write in their journals, that gives them a better degree of objectivity. As Sigmund Freud said, you can't analyze yourself. So getting someone who has the training to understand human behavior and to give you input, it can be very helpful. But I think it's really coming to ownership that we as individuals contribute to the strengths and the weaknesses of our marriage, and we need to take a look at where those are.
So let's say we've not got that sorted because it's never perfect. We've got a grasp of, I don't know, maybe we've got some hobbies that, we go off, he goes off and does his thing, she does her thing, they come back and they talk about it. How then do you create the intimacy where possibly there was none? Because what tends to happen is, when you hear people say we live like brother and sister, and, a lot of that closeness goes away. How do you hang on to that identity, but bring that intimacy back into the relationship simultaneously, as you say?
Well, that's the tricky, that's the key, that there's an ability to get out of your own shoes and to have a kind of empathy and respect for your partner, to care about them the way you care about you. And that takes a long time to develop. I mean, if one didn't come from a family where there is that kind of healthy role modeling, it's really, I mean, in my forthcoming book, I have a whole chapter on communication where one person is just saying to the other person, tell me about that. Can you tell me more about that? And they're not reacting. So they're learning about their partner. And it's not about them. They're learning about their partner. Tell me more. What can I do? How did you feel about that? So that, and then of course they can get back to themselves and they can switch roles. But that is the ideal situation where someone is secure enough within themselves that it isn't threatening to them to really learn about their partner. That's a kind of intimacy. That's good intimacy. Like, you're really getting into your partner's shoes. You want to hear about them. It's not about you. It's not that you might not offer your ideas, but it's about your partner at that moment. Tell me about, like, what was it like going and playing, tennis? Like, how was it? What was your experience like? It's a wonderful thing to feel that that your partner's listening to you and that they're really interested in you. And that doesn't happen enough.
In fact, we're not that bad at that, actually, but that's because I'm nosy, and I think I'm a wannabe therapist anyway. So I'm always interviewing and tell me more. So
but it's also but then it's also about that you're going to bring yourself openly and honestly into the relationship. In other words, that at that moment, okay, let's say you and I are having a relationship, you are going to be really interested in me. But if we're not just having an interview, let's say we're having a friendship, then I'm going to be interested in you and you're going to bring yourself openly and honestly so that we're having a we experience.
So if a couple can start there, because obviously if they're in the entrepreneurial space, there's always going to be that pull and that pressure on their time. So even the small amount of time they have, is what you're saying, is that's what they should focus on.
It should be intimate. It should be intimate. And I don't just mean sexually. It needs to be intimate. How can I help you? Tell me what's going on. I've got your back. This doesn't happen enough. This does not happen a lot. I mean, as I said, this is what keeps me in business. People don't know how to partner successfully, meaning that they are working on building themselves and they also have a deep concern about their partner's welfare. So let's use the example of an entrepreneur. Somebody's building a business, and let's say the person's a homemaker. Let's say it's the woman who's staying at home. She's with the kids, and her partner's very involved in his business. Well, her life at home is equally as important I mean, her part, that their lives together cannot just be about his business. Mm. He has to be interested in her and what she's doing. Okay, so it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
As we say, we're dealing with a lot of technology. There are a lot of the entrepreneurs that are coming on board, are coming along in, say, the online world, or a lot of industries that are new. And there are partners who just don't, number one, understand what they do. So there are people working for themselves and, well, when you're going to get a proper job. It's one thing when it's your friends, but it's something else when it's your honey who is asking those questions. Mm-hmm. How do you persevere, I guess, and do what you know you need to do? And bearing in mind, many of us who started out working for ourselves, just as you said earlier in your experience, didn't have a clue. We were nervous. We weren't sure we had what it took. And you need that other person to be there for you. How do you navigate it? Because both sides have a point that neither is wrong.
I mean, this gets into the whole concept of collaboration with your partner. I mean, and, you know, a really hardcore example of that, Georgette, would be, let's say the entrepreneur says, you know, we need to invest another $25,000. Well, I mean, you know, if you're living alone and it's your money, that, you know, that's fine. But when you have and this gets into why the personal relationship is so important, because it is important to negotiate certain things. You know, if one wants to get their way all the time, you know, don't get married. You know, if your partnership is an integral part of your life, and so is your business, there are times where you're going to have to navigate the conflict. Good conflict resolution skills, excellent communication skills. It all gets back to the dynamics between the two people. And, you know, sadly, if the relationship is not built on a solid foundation with good communication, with mutual respect and equality, there's going to be a problem. So that's the key. That's the key. It's not easy, like you said. I mean, there are some very, very difficult, complex issues like money, like, you know, can we do this work? You know, I want to have kids. I mean, but these are the kinds of things that, I mean, think about it. Partners in business have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I always say with partners in business is negotiate at the beginning and put it in writing and have the boundaries. So you're absolutely right. It's exactly the same.
That goes back to what I said a little bit earlier, that having a personal relationship is like developing a business. Yeah. It's you know, you have to work at it. There's nothing passive about it. It doesn't just happen because you have a piece of paper. And so that's I think that is an area where entrepreneurs need help. That's an area that's very underdeveloped. There's not a whole lot written about it. There are a couple of personal accounts that are written. Meg Cadeau, who is, I believe she's a journalist for Inc. magazine. She and her husband, who is the primary founder of, or one of the primary founders of Stonyfield Yogurt, she wrote a wonderful book that I would recommend to entrepreneurs, where she talks about her personal experience and, like, you know, I mean, they were like close to bankruptcy several times, and she got breast cancer, and, you know, they were living practically without, you know, electricity. And you know, she talks about that. Mm. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot written about the importance of the entrepreneurial relationship. And that's really what led me to write this book, which currently is at the publishers. And, you know, it's kind of groundbreaking in the sense that, you know, I talk about it from, a psychological perspective. I mean, I talk about it from some of the things you and I have talked about, which is that technology's changed, and therefore, I mean, technology has come into our lives, and life is very different. The quality of our lives with our spouses is very different, and therefore, the partnership between the two people has to have a life of its own that is, above and beyond, what most of us think just sort of naturally happens when you get married.
How necessary is it for the person who is not the entrepreneur to know about and going back to what you were saying about boundaries and partnership and setting goals together, how much about the business do you think it's important for the other person to know, if anything?
Personally, I think it is important, because if one is going to be a supporter of, let's just say, their under tremendous stress entrepreneurial spouse, I think it is important to be aware of what's going on. Having said that, I also recognize that some people don't want to be involved. And so I think what matters, Georgette, is that the couple creates what's best for both of them. I think in an ideal world, there's wonderful communication. They can talk about it. There's a respect that the entrepreneur has for their partner. But the bottom line is, though, that partner has to recognize that the entrepreneur has, it's not necessarily, in some ways it's a democracy, and in other ways it's not. So it's a very tricky partnership to navigate. And again, it all goes back to, I think that a lot has to be decided and worked on and defined. And, people have to be flexible, because those boundaries may need to be redefined at any point. Because it's very easy for the entrepreneur to bring home their stress. Let me add that there is very compelling research that suggests that there is a direct relationship between what's going on at home and what goes on at work, that they're continuously interacting. So, for example, if there's a lot of stress at work and somebody brings that into the house, the couple needs to be able to manage that. Or let's just say if there's a lot of stress at home, I mean, we all know what it's like to have stress at home and then have to go and build a business. Yeah. That's problematic. So there has to be a smooth relationship going on between the couple, so that they can navigate all of those stresses. Because if they don't, one is going to negatively impact the other.
Is there ever a time, do you think, when the conflict lessens, or is it just always a continuous cycle of just learning how to navigate them when they arise?
I think that there are always bumps in the road. I think there are times in life certainly in times of a business, where those bumps are, bigger than other times.
Yeah, sure.
I think what the individual and the couple has to do is develop really good coping skills, so that, when they're really down in the mud with big bumps in the road, they can weather those storms. But I think that the key is really comes from the individual and the couple. I'd like to think that, one is not constantly in a source of stress, but we know that until you sell your business for a couple of $100 million, there's ongoing stress.
Sure.
It doesn't go away. It's a way of life. And so not everybody can handle it, and not every couple can handle it.
And probably the question that intrigued me, and I'm putting you on the spot, what do you see as the symptoms are, the biggest trigger that happens to someone why they finally come and speak to you? And it's a little bit different in the US, because we're a bit more reticent in the UK. We're nowhere near as sophisticated as you guys about counselling yet. It's something that, really must we? Where in America it's a lot more mainstream. So the triggers usually are, we're on the brink of divorce. But in your practice, is that the case as well? Or do people come at a time when things can be fixed? The trigger's a little bit earlier.
Yes. I don't think people necessarily come when there's so much water under the bridge that, they can't, divorce is inevitable. I think, typically what happens is there will be a status quo between a couple. Life will go on, and whatever is problematic between them, it's okay because that's what they know. What is likely to happen is that one person begins to change, and the status quo no longer works for them. And so they're going to begin to perceive the relationship in new ways. So it's going to create some dysfunction. Again, there's a sort of harmony, even if it's dysfunctional, it's working. Mm-hmm. But when it stops working, one or both of those people is going to seek out some help. That's typically what's going to happen. And again, it's not, it's not usually at a point where they're getting divorced. I mean, hopefully it's not at that point, because people can learn to have good relationships.
It's interesting because I've always wondered whether, you said earlier about when, if you come from a background where you didn't have those role models or those references, then it's very difficult for you. And I think some people hang on to that. But what you're saying is, despite that, you can learn. It's not the end of the story. You can learn that. Amazing.
That's the optimistic part of it all.
Gosh, I could speak to you all night, Dave. Oh my gosh, it's so fascinating. And before I let you go, because I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but it's just such a fascinating subject, because I know you're knowledgeable about it. What do you see as probably the biggest change that needs to happen with us today in terms of nurturing our relationships and business? What do you see as probably the biggest problem? Say you had a magic wand and everyone came to you, the therapist, that you are concentrating on tackling. Is it the being an individual, the you, me, us, or is there something bigger than that you think?
I have an answer for that. And I think that what needs to happen, and I think the research bears this out, and that is that for success in life and success as an entrepreneur, and the research is very compelling, one's EQ, meaning their emotional quotient, is more important than their IQ. The research suggests that someone who has, let's say, a lower IQ than someone who has a genius IQ, if their emotions, and what I mean by that is that they have an understanding of their own emotions, and they know how to manage them, and they also have an understanding of other people's emotions, and they know how to manage those. So as that relates to the entrepreneur, learning about your emotions and learning how to use them effectively in business is considered more important than a lot of the tools that you have in your toolbox. So I would say that interpersonally and personally, people need to develop that aspect of themselves, and they're going to find a lot more success in their lives, both in business and out of business.
Do you know what? I mean, that is so profound you say that, because I've noticed a trend with a lot of, I'll use online again. So much of online is about tactics and strategy and how to make more money, how to make more money. But what I see, what's been coming through, and some of the things, and I talk to a lot of people who build online platforms and courses and do training and coaching, and the mindset stuff, the stuff geared towards your emotions, as you say, because I've always been quite a pragmatic person, quite linear, because I come from finance, though that's not my natural personality, but it's how I am, or how I've been in business. And in the last 8, maybe 9 months, I've I've massively shifted what I talk about from the practical to the why and how you feel about it. Hence why I came across you. You would never have been on my radar when I first started the show, because it was about, well, we need to get the taxes done and how to sort your money. I'm still doing that. But I'm so in tune to, it's not the knowledge, because we all know what we're doing. We all know what we should be doing. But why are we not doing it? What stops us when everything is in place? And it fascinated me. So you saying that is like, oh my God, yes.
It validates it all. I'm just passing on what the research says. And so it just really, just like you, it's really surprising to me that so little has been done in the area of integrating people's emotional development. People can make really bad business decisions. I'm not telling you anything you don't know because of they're emotionally underdeveloped.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I dismissed it all. I thought it's all very woo woo, and I really wish I'd taken it more seriously earlier, because I could have been more of help to people than I was, if that makes any sense. But everything you learn, you live and learn as you
Exactly.
evolve. But yeah, no, completely. Deb, that has been amazing. Thank you
No,
so
it was
much.
a pleasure.
But,
It was a pleasure.
it was I've had a real education fun. I had another doctor on the other day talking about stress in modern society, and it just time just flew by, and I just realized this really is my wheelhouse. I love listening to people such as yourselves, because you live and breathe it every day, and it just validates so much of the things that I believe and I see, because you're seeing it from a day-to-day perspective rather than my hunches. So thank you very much.
And
for
also
that.
it's been a pleasure to be able to put some of this into words, and hopefully your listeners will benefit from it, because it's not, it isn't just a tool to throw in the box. It's critical. It's critical in developing a business, in interrelating with clients, and and understanding people you're selling products to. It's not just oh, by the way. I mean, this is critical. Developing your emotional life and your interpersonal life is critical to success in life.
If people want to find out more about you, and obviously when the next book comes out, where can they go?
They can go to my website, which is www.Deborah, Deborah, Hecker, HECKER.com, drdeborahhecker.com, and they are very welcome to come and learn all about how their emotions affect their business.
It's a great website for information, and you've got some nice articles on there as well. So I recommend it. People go and have a look. That's wonderful. Deborah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Georgette. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
No problem.